Many of you I know have been following along for over a month now. This was a weekly event that we initiated as part of our reflexive strategy to the COVID-19 shelter-in-place sort of pandemic, and how did we manage to continue to stay connected with our partners and continue to stay connected with our community as we continue to implement all these programs and projects that we have to restore ecosystem and community resiliency across the Sierra Nevada. I'm Alex Keeble-Toll. I'm the Administrative Director here at the Sierra Fund. And today it's my pleasure to be co-hosting this Lunch and Learn with Program Director at the Sierra Fund, Dr. Carrie Monohan, looking at meadow restoration in the Sierra Nevada and resilient ecosystems and communities. So I know that many of you are well familiar by now with the Sierra Fund's mission, but our mission really works to confront the legacy of gold rush impacts in the Sierra Nevada. And it's really important to say that every time, because the gold rush is really the foundational point from which we embark on all of our different programs and projects. We specifically work to restore ecosystem and community resiliency in the Sierra Nevada region. And we're always looking to how that resiliency can be promoted into the future for a vibrant and sustainable Sierra Nevada, basically for generations to come. That's sort of our endpoint that we're shooting for. In terms of seeing the gold rush as a starting point for all of these different program areas that we have, we see a historic context where the gold rush had impacts to resiliency both at the mines in terms of the earth moving that was done, the washing away of hillsides with hydraulic mining, the carving of tunnels underground with hard rock mining. But we also see these impacts to meadows, which we're going to discuss in detail today, to forests, which were literally clear cut in order to timber the mines and fuel the stamp mills during the gold rush, to the fish. There were once very vibrant populations of anadromous fish in the Sierra Nevada, but as part of the movement and conveyance of water to the mines during the gold rush, major dams were placed on all the main stem rivers so that fish that spend part of their lives in the ocean and part of their lives in the headwaters can no longer return to their natal streams to breed. And we also see impacts to resiliency in terms of impacts on the First Nations of our landscape, who were essentially removed from a relationship with the land during the gold rush, were pushed off of ancestral homelands and away from cultural lifeways. And we see a need to continue to restore those impacts to resilience. The gold rush connection specifically to meadows is associated with the fact that meadows are these lush ecosystems that, had extensive forage both for wildlife and grains for First Nation people. And the early Europeans who came during the gold rush recognized this and quickly appropriated meadow ecosystems because they were really excellent for grazing cattle and sheep in order to feed the towns of the gold rush. So we see both grazing by livestock and then the removal of First Nations from this landscape with impacts to hydrologic function and loss of these place-based culturally informed land stewardship practices that have been in place for thousands of years. Our work to address meadow resiliency falls underneath our overall ecosystem resiliency program, which has a program objective to identify and fill data gaps that inform policy and best practices. And that's to the benefit of both the meadow ecosystems and the communities that steward them, and also communities downstream all the way from the headwaters to the sea who are benefiting from the hydrologic function of healthy meadows. The Sierra Fund looks at our work around our various programs in the Sierra Nevada in terms of where are there data gaps that we can use our multi-benefit approach to fill, so that way we can lead to these greater policy and resilience outcomes. So in terms of meadows, we look at how can we create a standardized protocol for monitoring meadow restoration across the Sierra. Is there enough carbon to offset the cost of restoration in terms of restoring these meadows and restoring their ability to sequester carbon? And how do we improve stewardship engagement in these local communities? Meadows of the Sierra are often located in very rural, very small headwater communities where First Nation people still live, where ranching communities live. And these communities have the capacity with support to steward these landscapes essentially in perpetuity into the future. So how can we improve that with our Meadows work? All of the Sierra Fund's work follows the same strategic arc. Our Meadow work is no different. We try to start on the ground with a 360-degree understanding of the problem. That's what we call our scoping phase. And then we participate and engage with problem solvers, in this case with the Sierra Meadows Partnership, which is region-wide across the Sierra. We explore solutions through our pilot projects. Two of our pilot projects that we're going to discuss in greater detail today are at Clover Valley Ranch and at Taswamkoya. These are two meadows located in Plumas County at the headwaters of the Feather River. We take what we've learned from our pilot projects and use that information to know better and do better, both in terms of our own projects, knowing better and doing better, and in terms of being able to identify best practices that we can share through the Sierra Meadows Partnership and through other collaborative networks so that people can know better and do better in these projects across the Sierra. So right now we're working with the Sierra Meadows Wetland Riparian Area Monitoring Program protocols in terms of developing protocols for monitoring that are specific to Sierra Meadows. We're looking at exploring carbon markets that would make meadow restoration essentially pay for itself in terms of carbon benefit. And we're looking at how can we use our very popular and immensely fun and wow, just a lot of work all rolled into one, field camps. We just got back last week. How can we use our field camps as these amazing tools for bringing people together, getting work done, and learning from one another? So the Sierra Meadows Partnership I mentioned is sort of the collaborative group where we engage problem solvers. The partnership has a goal to restore 30,000 acres of meadow by 2030, and our pilot projects in Plumas County are helping to contribute to this. So how do you get this Meadows community, all these amazing people on the ground wanting to participate in these projects so that everyone can leverage their expertise and their commitment, increase diversity and on the ground opportunities? Well, it's not all that difficult. Imagine you're in a meadow, it's sunny, the grasses are blowing, it's, you know, you're almost getting a sunburn on your forehead. It smells like that green, fresh cut grass, hay smell. You know, you're seeing all these amazing wildflowers. There's these cool insects everywhere. You're just hearing beneath it all the gurgling of water. There's really interesting avian species that you're, you know, seeing moving in and out of the willow thickets. You know, there's just these incredible lush wetlands where you can hear frogs or, you know, fish plopping around in the water. You know, imagine maybe you're at the meadow's edge and you're just waking up and you're, you know, starting to imagine this immense landscape. I mean, imagine how vast these meadows can actually be. We're going to fly right up over just now a meadow ecosystem that's, you know, nearly 3,000 acres. That's, these landscapes can go from being jewel box to really immense and grand. And so these are the systems we're working in, and here's kind of why. I'm going to kick it to Carrie Monohan.
That was so cool, Alex. Yay for taking us to the meadow and reminding us that together we can do so much more. So the first step to figuring out what we can do to restore meadows in the Sierra Nevada is having an understanding of where they all are and what condition they're in. And so we call this the Sierra Meadows Inventory. Sometimes we call it the Clearinghouse. And it is at UC Davis, and it's a repository of information so that for all these different people working on meadows for different reasons and in different ways, we can put that information in one place and benefit each other to take on more and ideally to have standardized approaches to monitoring certain important metrics. So there's over 19,000 meadows in the Sierra Nevada, and they cover, excuse me, they cover more than 280,000 acres. And 40 to 60% of those have been degraded by human activity, like grazing and logging. And these impacts to the meadows are being exacerbated by climate change. So that first step to addressing meadows across such a wide region was really pulling all of the information together. And I encourage you to look at the UC Davis Meadows Clearinghouse, which allows the stakeholders to work in concert. Let's see, I have to change shift. Great. So this diagram shows you a conceptual model, which in its very nature is an oversimplification of what's really going on out there, but it allows us to communicate 1,000 words with a picture. So this top one is a conceptual model of a degraded meadow that has an incised stream, so a stream that is cut through the meadow and therefore is not connected. The stream is not connected with the floodplain. This results to the desertification of the floodplain, so it's drying out and having drier species of plants of what was once a wet meadow. So a restored or pristine meadow would be connected. The surface water would be connected to the floodplain. Part of the reason this major shift occurs in so many meadows was livestock grazing and really intense overgrazing that occurred in the Sierra Nevada. That began in the 1860s. It was completely unregulated until the Taylor Grazing Act of 1934. But these legacy effects are still a primary driver of hydrologic degradation in many meadows. So that hydrologic degradation really occurs when a stream channel becomes disconnected from its floodplain. That's that first step. It forms this incised channel that quickly funnels water out of the meadow, like from point A to point B. Whoop, it doesn't perform many ecosystem services while it's in the meadow. It's just traveling through like a freight train. That has negative impacts to water quality, doesn't provide forage for grazers or wildlife habitat. And we're now learning that this type of degradation may also lead to substantial soil carbon loss and actually convert meadows that from net carbon sinks to sources of carbon in the atmosphere. So the picture below is a picture of a restored meadow. And some of the benefits that we see from that is this late season stream flow and increased forage that you see there, more grasses for grazers to eat, and clearly the habitat connection for wildlife. So restoration, meadow restoration is a way to change meadows' functionality and provide these different benefits. But the overarching goal, there might be many individual goals, but the overarching goal of meadow restoration is to reconnect that channel with the floodplain, which is typically accomplished by halting the stream incision and allowing groundwater to return to its pre-disturbance levels. So this is just a quick picture of a meadow that location where you see the degradation, you see the high banks there, and that's actually a stream gauge where we're monitoring how much water is in the meadow at that location versus an actual more hydrologically functional meadow system where that surface water is connected to the floodplain. Great, so here's some of the benefits of meadow restoration called out. Restored meadows provide improved water quality and sustain late season flows. They also provide that critical habitat for wildlife and forage for grazing livestock. In addition, the unique combination of high rates of net primary productivity, go back one, Alex, thanks, seasonally low temperatures and extended periods of saturated soil conditions can lead to high rates of soil carbon sequestration, which means that meadow restoration might in fact be an effective response to climate change. All right, so this picture that Alex has advanced me to is the Clover Valley Ranch project that we have right now. It's our primary meadow restoration pilot projects, and it's allowed us to develop and test many different protocols that will help the Sierra Meadows Partnership. We began the Clover Valley project in 2017, and we had just 1 year of pre-restoration conditions to monitor. So we surveyed the stream channels, we installed stream gauges, we installed groundwater wells, and we also did vegetation transects. Point Blue had been collecting bird surveys here since 2010, and so we were excited to see that continue so that we could look at the change with restoration. But this whole effort in 2017 was to give us some sense of a baseline conditions. And then we continue to monitor those things as the meadow changes. So the meadow was restored in 2018, and the design, can you go back one? And the design was done by NRCS as a part of their wetland conservation easement program. The restoration techniques that we're going to look at in just a second included grade control structures, and also in the upper reaches, Beaver Dam analogs to stop or slow the stream incision down and allow water and sediment to fill back up the meadow and reconnect the stream to the floodplain. This year, like Alex said, we just got back, so we continued a lot of the monitoring out there, the hydrology, the geomorphology, the vegetation, the birds, but we also added some more things. We added monitoring for soil carbon and also fish surveys. All right, let's look at some of these restoration techniques. So this is a grade control structure in Red Clover Creek, and you can see that some land recontouring has occurred here, but its primary purpose is to slow the water down and allow it to back up behind the structure. And then as sediment comes down the stream, it will also fill in these areas, and you'll get a stream that is more and more restored. So this is maybe a more expensive way of restoring meadows. Not all meadow projects have this level of investment in them, but very quick recovery is what we're seeing with these grade control structures. Okay, next slide. So this is a bit of a different philosophy around meadow restoration. This is using beaver dam analogs. And essentially it's just that, it's human-built beaver dams. And you can see they kind of do the same thing. They're slowing the water behind them, allowing it to spread out, and then allowing sediment to build back up. The difference is that we come back every year and do a little bit more with these beaver dam analogs, adding a few more stakes, if you will, broadening them out, and doing adding more willow to them so that they continue to function like we intended. So this is process-based restoration in that it's a process and it's a key part of stewardship. Great. It's all you, Alex. Sorry for taking so long.
Yeah, so many meadow benefits, which means that there are so many stakeholders invested in these landscapes, from folks who are interested in carbon sequestration for various reasons, either to help fund meadow restorations or because they're involved, you know, in the greater benefit of California on the climate resilience front. We've got, you know, our First Nation stakeholders who really see these landscapes as being key to cultural resilience. Meadows provide amazing avian habitat to a whole range of species. They are a biodiversity hotspot in Sierra ecosystems. Carrie mentioned water quality. There's also considerable fish habitat to be had in the headwaters. These landscapes continue to be working landscapes. They're part of extensive networks of rangelands. And they also provide habitat for other species, including beaver, that are both important to the process-based restoration process, because they're excellent stewards of streams, and also because they are a key cultural species of interest for the First Nation of Plumas County, the Mountain Meadow. When the Sierra Fund approaches these meadow restoration projects, we are just very, very interested in not just increasing the ecosystem resiliency, but being sure that we have an eye towards the community resiliency, because we think the only way to ensure the long-term stewardship of these landscapes is to invest in the communities as well. And that means understanding that these are working landscapes and that, you know, families need to make a living, and that it's part of many, you know, Headwater communities' cultural heritage on that front to have these meadows be working landscapes. So we are working to identify best practices around grazing management that will both allow meadows to be ecologically and hydrologically resilient, but be resilient working landscapes as well. We are always mindful of the fact that these landscapes are really important cultural landscapes. This is, you know, sort of a forthright acknowledgement of the vast amount of information that our First Nations have about the management of these landscapes. And so we are seeking to develop reciprocal relationships with our First Nation partners where we can actually exchange knowledge and skills, so that we can incorporate some of that traditional ecological knowledge into our restoration efforts, and then exchange Western skills like water quality monitoring or like, you know, stream channel geomorphology that help to inform the management of lands that are now being stewarded once more by First Nations. So at the Clover Valley Ranch project, we've worked to include the mountain Meadow alongside us in our field camps so that we can learn about some of those traditional ecological practices. And we've also supported the Meadow Summit Consortium in their work to identify landscape management priorities at Tasmamkoyam Meadow or Humbug Valley, also in Plumas County, so that we can have that reciprocal two-way street where we're exchanging knowledge across projects and from Western to traditional landscapes of knowledge. We coordinate inclusion for these two projects around this field camp concept. This is how we bring together all of these very diverse partners who come from all these different approaches for how to achieve multiple benefits. We hold week-long field camps on the ground in these meadow ecosystems. We're looking forward to being able to host a field camp at Tasmamkoyam in the future, public health impacts withstanding. And at Clover Valley, we've had field camps for going on 4 years now. Each year they take a slightly different shape. Obviously in the face of COVID, it was a very different landscape this year than in the past. But traditionally our field camps are a way to bring a bunch of diverse interests to the table and to be able to exchange knowledge with the First Nations, both the elders and the youth. So we had the pleasure of having a Meadow youth out with us at Clover Valley in 2018 and 2019. Both years we built Beaver Dam analogs with the Meadow youth. We had a different crew each year. I can tell you from experience that working in the water like we were here, hopefully you guys are able to see this, was a lot more fun than building the Beaver Dam analogs in the dry like we did in 2018. When you're looking at my screen on the right-hand side, you're actually seeing a side channel that we're panning to right now that we reactivated over the process of a day building this Beaver Dam analog with these Meadow youth. And it was really, really a lot of fun to see the water in that pond behind the Beaver Dam analog build up, build up, build up, and then finally build up enough that it was able to flow all the way through that side channel. And we were actually chasing it down the side channel to see where it would reconnect below the Beaver Dam analog. This was the previous year building in the dry, as I mentioned, not nearly so fun, although still an excellent learning experience with a different crew out there building Beaver Dam analogs in 2018. An important part of our field camp is that knowledge exchange. So making sure that the youth that we're working with, both the Meadow youth and the various students who come to join us from a variety of universities, including CSU Chico, UC Davis, University of Nevada, Reno, San Francisco State University, because our field camps are so multidisciplinary, it's an opportunity for folks to get out of their academic box or their life box, as it may be, and explore some different options. And we usually find something that resonates with someone. So from water quality monitoring to doing fish surveys, the young man on the right-hand side in the wetsuit, this was what delighted him when he was at field camp. Nothing else appealed to this young man except when he got in the water, that was what delighted him. As I mentioned, we're always working to incorporate and include traditional ecological knowledge and knowledge exchange when we're out at field camp. Really the best way to do that is to get on the ground with elders and Western experts so that we know that if I'm saying red clover and I'm pointing it at that and you're saying red clover, are we talking about the same thing? Just having that opportunity to build relationships on the ground is a key part of our Meadows work. Carbon sequestration is another way that in 2019 we were able to connect youth with experts. This is with our partners at San Francisco State University who are getting ready to gear up on some significant research looking at the carbon storage potential of different vegetative communities. So the girls who are in the lower right-hand corner, this was the activity that really resonated with them. They really enjoyed being out there with these plant experts and exploring this very high-end technology. So we've built BDAs the last 2 years and it's kind of exciting. I'm just going to wrap up here by looking at, so what does this look like with the BDAs? We know that they need to be maintained over time. These are BDAs that we built in 2018 with our Meadow youth at our first field camp where they were included. You're looking at an upstream BDA with post set and a downstream BDA on what we know as subchannel B. So this is the upstream BDA in June 2018 when we finished it. We used pine posts that we harvested on site along with pine slash from the post harvested and then willow. Here's that same BDA again a year later. A month earlier when we were out at the Meadow doing a tour with the Sierra Meadows Partnership. So you can see there's water coming under it, but there's also water backed up behind it. And then here's the same BDA, which was repaired last fall, but this is the same BDA about a week ago. And so what we're seeing is that there's water ponded up behind that fence in a way that we perhaps hadn't necessarily anticipated. When we were building these BDAs, I was driving my truck through what you're now seeing as a pond. The same thing for the downstream BDA on that channel. This was another BDA that we built with Meadow Youth in June 2018. Here that BDA is in May 2019. And here that BDA is in June of 2020. And you can see it's got that telltale spot in the lower right where it kind of blew out that first year when we saw the 2019 picture. You can see where the water's coming through. So this BDA, you know, could probably use some additional repair, perhaps, in 2020, but that's the beauty of the process-based restoration is you can go out there and tweak it depending on what the response is. So what's our major progress around meadow restoration? Well, we're really excited that we've been working with the Sierra Meadows Partnership to develop standardized protocols and trainings around that wetland riparian area monitoring protocols practices. We are working with carbon market economists to define what a crediting rate would be for ranchers to incentivize restoration. Essentially, this is the idea that if there were a way to pay ranchers to restore land and keep it restored, perhaps not graze the riparian corridor, depending on their landscape, then that would be a way to incentivize those working landscapes and those managers of working landscapes. And improving stewardship and engaging local communities by continuing to have these annual field camps with our First Nation partners and a range of technical experts and university students and, you know, other members of the public. The vision is ultimately resilient meadows and communities. This is what we're hoping for, you know, the dream, the beaver with the fish and the beautiful meadow. And we're getting there. In 2019, BDAs were built on Dixie Creek. We came back this year, and you're looking at kind of a chunk that's been taken right out of the middle of one of those Beaver Dam analogs. Yeah, the Beavers, they had some thoughts on where that BDA was placed, that one in particular. They chewed right through the middle of it, and then they built their own BDA just upstream of that. The BDA crew did come back in and did what we call post assisted. So those posts that you're seeing are where they actually physically hammered in posts to help support that beaver dam. But the Beaver really had a better idea about where that dam should go, because ultimately this is what the Beaver are going for, is this beaver end game of this infinity edge pond. This is an actual beaver dam that has been post assisted at the very top of the Dixie restoration on Dixie Creek at the Clover Valley Ranch site, that was restored in 2019 initially, and process-based restoration maintenance is ongoing. Well, we're really excited that you were all able to join us, and we of course want to acknowledge what a collaborative project this has been, both in terms of having 2 federal and 2 state agencies on board for funding, and then beyond funders who have been extraordinary partners and never shy about joining us out in the field to check out how things are going, to learn new things. We've got numerous project partners across both the Clover Valley Ranch project and our work at Tasman-Coyam with the Meadow Summit Consortium, including the consortium, Red Clover LLC, Plumas Corporation, Point Blue Conservation Science, and a host of universities who join us. This is my last Lunch and Learn of the Lunch and Learn series, but you're coming up on a couple of weeks learning about our work to build the capacity of disadvantaged communities in the Sierra Nevada, both in terms of outreach around water quality and water access, and wildfire and air quality, which is especially timely given that we are coming into perhaps a very intense fire season. It's been dry and warm. And then we will be finishing up our Lunch and Learn series hearing from Sierra Fund CEO Elizabeth Martin, who will talk about For the Sierra and how does the rubber meet the road with policy and advocacy in the state capitol. Join us in restoring resiliency to California's headwaters. We're always excited to have you here, and do follow up if you have questions. Thanks so much.
That's great, Alex. Nice work. I put a link in the chat for anyone who hadn't yet noticed that all the Lunch and Learns are recorded and are placed there as soon as we can. We have people working remotely in remote areas, and the video uploading can be really slow and onerous, but it is happening, and we encourage you to check those out. They're certainly not perfect, neither are we, but they're a wonderful collection of the different projects that we're working on, and some is better than not having them up there. So at this time, we'll have Jenny stop recording, and we'd just love to entertain discussion, questions, comments, and have a little time with you all.